Welcome guys to episode 1 of how to start a reef tank, where we're going to be going through everything you need to know from a dry tank all the way up to having corals and fish in it. So in this episode we're going to be going over a little bit about the tank as well as the nitrogen cycle and how to get a reef tank started. So first off, if you guys saw our earlier video, you know we went with this innovative marine 15 gallon. This is a very budget conscious tank and also a good starting size. This is an all-in-one tank, and basically what that means is you have the filter in this back chamber section that's hidden by this black acrylic. This tank is 15 inches by 15 inches by 15 inches, and so it makes it really easy to scape because it's basically a cube, so you don't have a lot of weird dimensions you have to work with to figure out. So as we go through this series, we're going to be breaking down the sand we're using, the rocks we're using, all the equipment you need, as well as everything you need to know. Today we're going to be starting off with the basics, which is how the filtration system back here works. So there's 3 basic kinds of filtration. You have physical filtration or mechanical filtration. This is going to be things like a filter sock that physically catches different particulates or food waste or anything like that that it can physically catch. The next type is chemical. So that's typically in the form of some sort of media like carbon. And what that does is it draws out any chemicals or odors that might be discoloring the water. You can have different medias that remove different molecules in here. And then the final type of media is biological. And that's going to be the most important, especially for us here today. And so the biological filtration is what actually processes the nutrients that you're putting into the tank to either feed the fish or the corals and things like that. The most important thing when it comes to setting up a reef tank is understanding the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle basically has 4 parts. It starts with ammonia, then nitrite, then nitrate, and finally nitrogen. Nitrogen is found all throughout our atmosphere. There is a ton of it, and it's actually largest amount of chemical compound in the air. So most of the air that you're breathing in is actually nitrogen. Now nitrogen has a very important role to play in our aquarium. The corals are photosynthetic, so they'll actually grow off the light, but they also require nutrients in addition to that. They also use certain elements in the water like calcium and alkalinity to grow their skeleton. And then they also use amino acids and things like that, but also they really need nitrogen, usually in the form of nitrates, to feed off of and help them grow. So the way that this nitrogen is processed from these different stages, starting out at ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, and then finally nitrogen, is by the bacteria in your aquarium actually processing and breaking it down and moving it into the next part. There's a ton of different types of bacteria, but there's a few that will serve each purpose for us. There's a lot of different ways to get this bacteria, and it can actually occur naturally. So as soon as you put your salt water in, your rock, your sand, and you get ready to start your tank, you'll really need to add some form of ammonia, and that'll get your bacteria kick-started. So you can either use a product like this Dr. Tim's ammonia chloride solution. This is probably the easiest and the cleanest way to start your cycle. It's just pure ammonia basically with a binding agent. And what this does is it adds that ammonia and gets that bacteria started and growing until you have all the different stages. You can also do something called phantom feeding. This is usually the way that I would recommend starting a tank if you don't want to invest in some ammonia that you're only going to use once. So this is where you buy basically the kind of food you're going to feed the fish, and you feed the tank as though you have a fish in there. So usually the amount of food you want to feed is about the size of the fish's eye. So remember that when you're feeding your fish, they really are going to look a lot hungrier than they actually are. And any excess food you're feeding them is just going to get broken down and make your tank end up dirtier. So by phantom feeding, all you need to do is feed for a couple of days, a few pellets or flakes or even frozen food, whatever your preferred form of food is. And as it dissolves and breaks down due to the salt water, it'll lead to ammonia that'll get processed by some of those bacteria, which then transforms into nitrite, and then that gets broken down by another layer of bacteria and it turns into nitrate. And then finally, there are some bacteria that turn it into nitrogen that we actually breathe. But usually the best way to remove nitrates is either through your corals actually growing or through water changes, which is typically what you'll have to do before you have a ton of corals in your tank. And that is very important for other water chemistry issues that we'll touch on later in the series. But for right now, basically a water change is where you pull out a percentage of your water, so not all the water in your aquarium, but usually between 10 and 20% of your water. Remove it and replace it with clean salt water that you either make yourself, or what I recommend is buying it from a store, because you don't need to invest in the filtration equipment required to get your water ready for salt. Now, another thing you can do to jumpstart your cycle, there's a couple different methods you can use. The first is going to be bacteria. Now, there's a few different brands of bacteria, but really any of them work. I do really like the Dr. Tim's. This is their product, EcoBalance. This is more for established tanks and really does a very good job of cleaning things up. But for starting a tank, you're going to want to use the Dr. Tim's One and Only. Now, there's a few brands, like I said, Fritz, Seachem, that also make products that you can use, and they all work very well. I've just personally used Dr. Tim's over the years, and it's definitely worked out very well for me. Now, something that a lot of veteran aquarists might do is use a fish to jumpstart the cycle, and they'll put this fish in, usually a hardy fish like a clownfish or a damsel, and they'll use it to cycle the tank. They'll use it to add that ammonia, which then will create and jumpstart all the bacterial growth. However, I usually don't recommend this, not only because you could end up killing the fish, but also because it is very harmful to the fish. Ammonia actually burns fish, and really their gills will get burned. And you can see that if the ammonia levels get really high, but it'll just irritate them and make them very stressed out, even in those low levels during the cycle. So it's really not great to use a fish to cycle it, especially when we have things like ammonia that's going to cycle the tank even faster and do a better job because it's already in the pure form of ammonia, and you don't need to wait for that fish poop or fish food to break down and then get turned into ammonia and then nitrite and then nitrate. So you might be wondering, well, I've got ammonia, I've got nitrite, how do I know what I'm being shooting for? Well, the best thing to do is to get your water tested at a local fish store, or you can test it yourself. With this, I would recommend just using an API test kit. They're usually the most affordable, and they give you a really good baseline for what your levels are at. I would recommend avoiding the little test strips that you can use that are a little piece of paper. They're just not as accurate, and these API test kits are droppers, and they're very simple to use, and they don't require a lot of effort, but they're going to be a lot more accurate compared to those testing strips. Once you add whatever source of ammonia you prefer, either ammonia, the fish food, or some sort of bacteria, what's going to happen is your ammonia is going to spike. So it'll go up, and then as it starts to come down, what's happening is your bacteria are growing. So your nitrite will start to go up as your ammonia is going down. Then once your nitrite spikes, what'll happen is it'll start to go down, and your nitrates will start to go up. And then finally, once you have your nitrates start to come down, which is what will happen once that final group of bacteria grows and flourishes in your aquarium, is you're going to want to get ready to add your fish. So the way this cycle works is you get your sand, rock, and water. You get all those set up. You can add a light if you want to, but even if you do get your light at this point, I recommend not turning it on because you're just going to grow algae and stuff like that. And then you're going to add your source of ammonia, and then you're going to wait until that point that I described where your nitrates start to fall, and then you'll be ready to add everything else in there. Now, there is one little shortcut you can take in this, and that's using cycled media. Now, what that means is that you've gotten it from a tank that's already cycled and has this bacteria living in it. Now, there are a few forms this can take, and really there's no right answer for this, but it's going to be something that the bacteria can live on. So bacteria likes to live in these porous little holes, and this is what's called a marine pure sphere. Now, these have 240 square feet of surface area on them because they have all these tiny little holes inside. Now, this is very similar to live rock, and it's a really good surface for these bacteria to live on. You can take a couple of these balls and put them into your aquarium, and they'll actually jumpstart your cycle and get it moving even faster than with some ammonia or even some bacteria, because it doesn't have to take the time to actually attach to the media. It's already attached. So this is really the easiest way to get your tank cycled. and is usually what I do since I already have tanks set up. Now, we will be adding Marine Pure spheres onto our website that we'll be able to sell and ship out to you, so you can get cycled media delivered straight to your house, and you can use that rather than trying to find some other sort of source. There's also a few different forms that these Marine Pure takes place in. So there's also a couple of blocks that they have, and then there's any number of other brands that make very similar other products like this. All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this episode of how to start a reef tank. If you guys have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also stay tuned for more of our videos. You can check out some of our other videos as well. And if you guys want to visit our website, you can check that out here.